The webinar. I'm hoping that you can all hear me. So if you can't, just shout up and let me know. But yeah, welcome to the Events Guide webinar on storytelling. And I'm really happy that you're all here and you're all joining me on this. I would like to say from the outset that I am normally behind the camera, supporting the host and making sure that they're okay. So today I'm doing both. Anything can go wrong. You know, we have barking dogs, we could all get muted, it could all go wrong, but you know, we're all friends here. It's going to be okay. So we are going to have these series of webinars every couple of weeks, all around marketing and eventing, and hopefully I can share the things that we're learning on this journey and have some amazing guests. So just like today, we've got Tim Elliott, who I'll introduce to you shortly, and he is a bit of a marketing legend, and he's going to help us out. And hopefully by the end of this session, we'll have a better understanding of how we can use storytelling in everything that we do, whether we are doing a TED Talk or whether we are going for an interview. Storytelling is so important. And for me personally, storytelling is massive in everything we do. So the Events Guide's mission and all the events that we do is to make sure that I create a space where your kind of people want to hang out. And that always starts with a story of why you want to do it. Then we create a story for why people should want to go to it. And then it in itself creates a story. It's just stories, right? And hopefully we'll build on that today. And I'm going to start with a little story just to give you an idea of how they can be really, really impactful. So in 1990, I joined the Navy. And I joined the Navy because I didn't want to do what all my mates were doing, which was going off to college and then going off to university. The last thing I wanted to do was sit in another classroom. I wanted to get out and do stuff. Now, I did 13 years in the Navy before I realized that the Navy wasn't for me. So I decided to leave. And I then had a massive problem because everybody kept saying to me, for the level that you reached in the Navy, for you to do that in the real world, you're going to need a degree. Now, I didn't want to go and get a degree. And I said, I can do this anyway. And I went off. And rightly so. Every time I applied for jobs that I thought that I could do because of everything else I've done, they would always say to me, you haven't got a degree, you're not even going to get an interview. So I thought, right, screw them. I am just going to create my own jobs. So I created my own businesses, I did my own work, and then I never applied for a job ever again. I never had a CV because what would happen was someone would meet me through the work I would do and say, have you ever thought about doing this? And I would go, no. And they said, would you like to? I went, yes. And that's how I got every job. But recently, I came across this organization that I really, really was impressed by. And I thought, I've got to work there. So I was there delivering a product externally. And I always thought, this is fantastic. I don't want to leave this. I definitely want to work here. So I got talking to the people who really knew the business, and I tried to find a job that I could do, and there was an events job. I thought I could do that, but I got no events qualifications. I've done events tons in all the roles I've done, but I got no qualifications. So I met the person who was responsible for hiring and got talking, and we spoke about events and we spoke about the company, and we realized that we understood how it all worked. And I got asked a few questions, and I would explain in a story, more often than not, on how I'd done that sort of thing before. And I ended up getting an interview. So I had to go write a CV, which I was already worried about because it would have no degree on there and it would have no qualifications in marketing. And then I sent it in. But true to form, they interviewed me anyway because they'd met me. I had 3 interviews, and every interview I left thinking they're underwhelmed because every time they asked me a question, or nearly every time, they would say, I would have to answer it, I don't know. Or I don't know, but I would then answer with, this is how I would do it. And this is a time when I'd done it before in the past. And we'd go into a story about how I'd done something. And after 3 interviews, they went, you're the right fit and you're the right experience. Let's go for it. So I was able to draw people to me. Stories lets people care about you. They grow empathy, and it builds a bond between you and that person, and it allows them to take a chance, and they get drawn towards you. And this is all to do with oxytocin in the brain. You know, when kids get told at school, you're going to get a you're going to get story time, they all go tearing over to the story mat because the oxytocin in the brain, which makes them feel good, has gone up in there, and they're going, I'm ready for a story. And that stays with us in our lives. So if we can then make stories relevant to the situation we're in, we can draw people together. And that's where Tim is going to come in today. So I'm going to bring Tim in now and introduce him while he's live, and then you can see him being a bit embarrassed while I introduce him. So any minute now, Tim is going to jump on the screen. There he is. Yeah, it's amazing. He's the man.
Magic.
Yeah. It's Mr. Ben, I think, but a lot of our audience might be too young to remember that guy. So this is Tim, and Tim is a fabulous marketeer. There isn't much Tim doesn't know about marketing. He's been in the business for over 23 years. He's worked with amazing companies like BBC, Santander, various universities. I couldn't possibly stop to list them all off. And Tim is going to help us today understand how we can use storytelling in business and then make us more successful, because it's going to bring people together. And I've definitely spoken enough now, Tim. So I'm going to hand over to you. And it's all yours. And sorry, everybody, the last thing, please get your questions in. Let's get them answered straight away, because Tim has given me permission to interrupt and make this interactive throughout. So get them in and let's get them over to Tim. All yours.
Thank you. So hi everyone, like Steve says, I'm Tim. I thought, Steve, actually your story that you started with was really interesting. What you did have, and what everybody kind of has in that situation when you're trying something you haven't technically got experience or qualification for, it is a thing called an origin story. You know, like a superhero origin story. Everybody's got one and they're so cool. Like I would suggest to everybody write their own origin story, because it's surprising the stuff you've done, right? It's surprising the stuff you've done, but it's great start.
Now.
Yeah, go off to do it now. You've got about 15 minutes, technically. Right, I'm just going to share my screen, folks. Bear with me 1 minute. We should be in control. Okay, good. So today, over the next kind of 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to run through a few slides all about the topic that it says on the screen, about virtual storytelling. And what we're going to do, we're going to touch on what storytelling is, a bit of the foundations of storytelling, how it works in business, and then quite aptly, how we tell a virtual story in spaces like we're together now. So I think it was a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago now, that I had a good conversation with Steve on the telephone. Because me and Steve, outside of lockdown, are quite heavily involved in online events, like real life events, like speaking, delivering events. I go to all Steve's events at Cooper Parry that he facilitates, really good stuff. And we were discussing the changes in our little corner of the world, our little part of the world. And one of the things that I'd learned from those early days in lockdown is the transition between telling stories offline and online, you know, in a virtual world. Because right now, all we have are platforms like this to tell our story. We need to tell it virtually, right? We used to be able to connect in person. We used to be able to have meetings, conferences, seminars, workshops and keynotes where we get to tell our story and do what Steve did, meet a bunch of people and tell your own story in person. But that's all well and good. But now in worlds, in connected worlds, right, through the digital platforms that we use, connection is even more important. It's even more important. You have to superpower up your humanity of the story that you want to tell. You have to 10x everything, the emotion, the energy, just to get the same kind of retention and connection that you would in a real life event, because the energy is different. We're kind of just one step removed. And a great vehicle for sharing ideas and emotion and story is, of course, story. And that's what I want to start by today. So let's have a look at the history of story, right? Let's go. It's been, like Steve said, it's one of the oldest forms of content, right? It's one of the oldest ways we communicate. Cavemen's told stories by painting on walls. But I want to take you back to the time of Aristotle, right? So cast your mind back to Aristotle. He brought us a thing called the 3-act structure. So the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? And that format of story is still used today. So following from Aristotle and his famous 3-act structure, we have a guy called Joseph Campbell who came about in the mid to early 1900s. And he taught us of a thing called the hero's journey. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but it's about the hero of the story and how they go from the normal world, the status quo, through some kind of change or challenge. And then they return to the normal world, improved, powered up, superpowered, with a bit of new skill and new experience, ready to teach that to the other people in the ordinary world. And we're literally living through an example of the hero's journey currently. In February and January, we're all in the normal world. Came the end of March and we all faced a challenge, whether we liked it or not, thanks to a little C word, not that one, COVID-19. Keep it clean, folks, keep it clean. And we faced that challenge and we're about to come out the other side, right? And we've all learned something. We've all got a new experience that we want to kind of share and be part of and tell our grandkids about and our colleagues. We've all learned and progressed something. So it's a great example of the hero's journey in action where we are right now. And a bit more recently, over the last few years, there's a lady, a very smart lady in California, in San Francisco, where all the big tech companies are, called Nancy Duarte. And she shows us that stories have a shape to them. There's a shape to a narrative. And if you're interested in that, you should check out Nancy Duarte's TED Talk. You'll find it on YouTube dead easy. It's super popular, called The Shape of a Story. And in that, she explores some of the greatest storytellers of recent times. She looks at Dr. Luther King, Obama, Steve Jobs, and she analyzes the shape of the stories they tell in their presentations and their launches and inauguration speeches and stuff like that. It's so interesting. But you'll get to, with those things in mind, the hero's journey, the 3-act structure, and the shape of a story, you'll get to understand how to put together your own story. You'll get to put together that it's not like writing a book. You're not writing a novel. There's a formulaic way that anybody can tell a good story. And businesses. So we're talking about storytelling in business today, right? And businesses have long used narrative to communicate change. And again, change is something that's at least front of mind, if not on the very front line of our businesses currently. And it's been used to communicate change, to communicate purpose, to communicate new products and services, to communicate their brand experiences. And even today, I've recently done workshops where we've used narrative and story to design and implement experiences. So customer experience, employee experience, and brand experience have all been communicated internally to staff as well as externally. Because telling the right story in relation to experience connects those people we serve to those inside our organization. And that is having that connection, having alignment to people in the leadership team on the front line of your business, to the customers, as frictionless as possible is really powerful. And narrative helps us do that. But it's not all creative marketing stuff, this story, right? It's not all stuck in the realms of me, right? Steve alluded again to oxytocin earlier. It's been scientifically proven by legitimate brain scientists, legitimate, that story engages our brains at all levels. Now, I'm not going to go super sciencey, but story engages our intuitive brains, our emotional brains, our rational brains, which is very big in B2B and business purchases, and somatic, our physical brains, right? Story has been, brains have been tracked to show engagement and stimulation at all of those levels. And story is the only form of communication that does that. So now you know those bits. Once you get into story, once you start thinking about story and it becomes at the front of mind, you'll notice story everywhere. You'll start to see it in great kind of advertisements and campaigns, in good kind of letters and experiences, and of course in great businesses. You'll notice that stories everywhere. So I want to share some practical advice as well today, and not just preach about the benefits of story. So stories, especially for business, and especially ones that are told virtually in places like this, when we don't have the human-to-human connection, they're more effective when they have one idea at the center, or the kernel or the moral of a story. And the bigger the idea, the stronger the idea, the more clear the idea, the better the narrative around it will be. More purposeful stories create bigger impact. And that's why we tell stories. We tell stories to move people, to create impact. So I know a lot of you will struggle with the idea of getting a clear, good idea for a foundation of a story, but there's a great little exercise I want to share with you now that I use with most of my clients. I get to do it just because it's such a great little exercise, and it's called 50-15-5. Right, I'll just explain it now. I will make sure Steve sends out an email or put this description in a chat if you haven't got anything noteworthy to hand. But it's 50-15-5. What you do, you give yourself a 10-minute time window, and then you have the idea of your project. So about a project, a service, a brand, a business, something like that in your mind that you're going to write about. And then you do a 50-word description of it, followed by a 15-word description, followed by a 5-word description of this thing, this project, for example. And what that does, it helps you formulate some core blocks of communication that are very clear ways of communicating about this idea. And it's really useful. The reason why I like it is that there's 3 main consumer types of story in a business. There's the big picture person. Now, a lot of execs and CEOs and founders are this guy. They're a big picture person. They want to know the big idea in a short sentence, in a small time frame, and then they want to understand and be curious enough about that idea that they ask the questions they need answers to move forward. So the big picture person. Next up, you've got the details person. You need to be able to tell a story in as much detail as possible for these people. These are usually the operations guys, right? They need, if you were to write out a story on a piece of paper in a document, they would need an appendix and an index and lots of data points. They literally need to know all of the stuff, right? So you've got the details person. And then finally, you've got the emotional person, somebody who wants to be inspired. They want to know why they're doing it and what change they're going to make and the purpose behind it and all that sort of stuff. And what 50-15-5 does is help you formulate the kernels of those stories. So the 5 is obviously the big idea. If you can explain your project, your service, your product in 5 words, it's got to be a powerful 5 words, right? It's got to be the big picture, the one to get that person's interest. The 50 is quite the start of a longer form piece of content, a longer form story. It's got a bit more detail. You can go a bit more in depth about the colour and the purpose and the background and the proof of the story. And then you've got the emotional story, which is a bit longer, a sentence. It's enough to get people hooked, but you can build around those foundations of story. That's why the little 50, 15 and 5 task works. Again, if you don't have notes or anything on you at this point, don't worry, I'll make sure we pop it out somewhere through the next story. So while we're on topic of 3s, I want to explain and discuss the 3 pillars of virtual storytelling. Right, there's 3 different formats of virtual storytelling that really work. So we've got them on screen in front of you. You've got the conversational, educational, and inspirational. Right, let's look at conversational. So conversational is maybe panels and Q&A based things where the conversation is the vehicle for the story. There's not really a formal presentation. There's probably not a PowerPoint deck in sight. It's based on experts or authorities or influential figures being able to discuss a topic and thought leadership and share the knowledge. There's a great example of this actually called the One Question Conference. If you look on any social media or Google it, the One Question Conference is it's now an online event, but is obviously a real life event as well, where a group of people and experts go to deliver answer one big question and deliver thoughts and insights into that question. And it's an all-day event based around this one topic of, I think this year's topic is how can businesses do good? So purpose-driven businesses and stuff like that. And you've got a whole day of experts in the audience interacting and having conversations about that topic. It's a really, really good event. You should check out some of the content on there. Next up, you've got educational. So educational storytelling is a little bit like this. There's probably a deck. There's probably a PowerPoint slide that has got some information, some data points on there, a bit of case studies, some proof. A lot of these are done in kind of traditional webinars and traditional webcasts, right? They want to prove and educate and give you information on a topic, on the story that they want to tell. And then finally, you've got the inspirational. So the inspirational stories are usually don't have any slides. We're all, if you remember or picture kind of Jackanory or campfire stories, these are the inspirational type of stories where there's no slides. You're just intently on the edge of your seat listening to somebody, and it's an emotive thing. You're trying to move people, like a story should move people, not move products and services. So it's very emotional. There was a great example of an event who used this inspirational story format, not last week, the week before, but I think they're all online, called the Space In Between Festival. So the Space In Between Festival is run by a company called Another Door, which helps people in transitions between being made redundant and career change, but it's not super relevant. But they had 4 or 5 mini talks, so 20-30-minute talks like this one today, who were just people telling their story and inspiring people that stuff can be done, that change, out of change comes opportunity. And they were using narrative and case studies in their own story, like Steve told us right at the very beginning, to communicate that. So these 3 pillars of virtual storytelling, they're actually pretty relevant for in real life storytelling as well when we get back to that world. But why they're important in virtual storytelling and the platforms that we're using right now is because we haven't got the ability to close the door behind us on a online event. Like, people can drop off and pop in and out at any time. But we've not got a closed meeting room. We've not got a conference where it's a bit awkward to leave because you're sat near the front. And we haven't got 4 to 6 to 8 hours of PowerPoint followed by PowerPoint followed by PowerPoint to listen to people's stories. You have to have a bit more focus on these 3 kind of formats of story, able to keep the connection with your audience, to keep with the connection with the people that you're telling the story to, and to help them retain the information. Because in this situation, again, Steve alluded to this in the beginning as a great warm-up, Steve, great warm-up, that at any point, a dog or a child or a wife may interrupt your session. The internet may go down, the door might come, stuff might happen. Life happens in virtual world, especially in lockdown, you will find. I think there's a great thing going around social media where that guy was on the news and his son came on and he had a proper go at him, which always made me chuckle. But anyway, back to the talk. Sorry, I digress. It's all about using these 3 pillars, these formats of story to get good, strong connections with the people you're talking to and help them retain the point of the story. But there's one more skill, right? There's one more skill that is important in the virtual storytelling world, and again, in business as a whole, and that's facilitation. So facilitators are a good sort of person. Like, we're lucky today, right? Steve Whittle is on the line. I've been to a few events facilitated by Steve. He probably won't shout about them himself because he's a very modest guy, but he's one of the best event facilitators I've seen in action, and I'm a big fan of the facilitator skill set, right? And what they are in terms of storytelling in a business and a virtual storytelling format are the narrators of the 21st century, right? So when I grew up, because I'm proper old, like Steve said, I've been doing this stuff for about 23 years. I remember a program called Jack and Nori on the actual TV, and they had narrators. People read a story to you, which is okay, but facilitators have superpowered that. They've plussed it for the 21st century. So as a visual story, you need to understand the art of facilitation, because you might not be lucky enough to have a Steve Whittle in the background. It might be your pitch that you're trying to do for a startup, for a new business, for an idea. But you need to understand the art of facilitation. And what it does is the facilitators need to understand the whole big picture of the story. They need to, going back to Aristotle, right? You need to understand the beginning, the middle, and the end. What the point and the purpose and the most important thing to get over in the beginning, the middle, and the end is. Why they're in that order, and why should other people care that are listening. You also need to navigate technology like this, right? There's no end of platforms. Today we're on GoToWebinar. I've used probably 4 different things this week, 4 different platforms of this week. You need to be able to transition the tech well in order for the story to flow, in order for the audience to be kind of contain their attention and be able to retain the information. And obviously tech breaks, right? We all know that, but you need to be prepared as possible. You need to be able to manage the transitions between parts of your story and the 3 kind of different formats, the conversational, the educational, and the inspirational. You need to make those transitions as frictionless as possible. Because when you're communicating online, when you're telling a story, the narrative is designed and flowed, and it's super important. But if you know your story, if you've got the story at the heart of what you do and the idea you're trying to get over, the format and the structure and the information, the words you use to convey that story may be different. It's not a script, right? It's a story. It's an emotive thing. It's not a verbatim, word for word, 14 sheets of paper, people reading notes at the front of a conference, which we've all seen. And it doesn't compel people to do anything. It's not a compelling story in that format. And that's where facilitation as a skill comes into it. So this is the last slide for me before we head into Q&A and the time to expand on any of the ideas I've shared today. So before we head into that bit, before Steve heads back to the mic, I want to do a bit of a recap. So we started off by looking back at what story is and why it's always been a powerful tool, but in places like this, in places like GoToWebinar, in a virtual environment, why it's so more powerful now. And then we know that virtual storytelling especially needs one big idea at the center of it. We looked at the 50-15 5 tasks to help you define and refine the one big idea, the kernel, the moral of your story, so it's easy to communicate and easy to expand on. And you'll be able to tell a story in 5 minutes, in 20 minutes, in an hour. It doesn't matter which way, as long as you've got that kernel, that nugget of a story in the beginning. And it's important to have one. It's important to have a clear purpose of a story, because the more ideas you try and get across, the more excited you get and points you try and share about a story, the more diluted the impact becomes. Because if you remember in the beginning, purposeful stories are more impactful. And then we looked at the 3 formats of story. The 3 formats of story are conversational, educational, and inspirational. The very best stories and virtual storytellers are able to mix and intertwine those formats, but it's up to you. The point of being able to tell a good story is to understand what format your audience wants it in and how well you can tell it in that format. It's okay to just do educational, to just do a deck if that's how people want it, if that's the format people want it, and if you can deliver a good story in that format. But they can be delivered in all of them, a combination, or any one of them. But conversational, educational, and inspirational are 3 core story tenets, 3 core story formats. And then we looked at the skill of narration, or facilitation as we call it in the 21st century. The story is super important. Obviously it's super important, but the how you deliver it matters. And that's the art of facilitation. That's the narration of the story. That's understanding the platform you're on, the audience you have, the time limit, you know, the graphics, the stuff to leave out. And just before we head back to Steve, so get ready, Steve, get ready. I want to read the quote that's been on the screen for this slide. A good story is like a compass. It always guides you to your true north. Now, I love the analogy of the compass. So it doesn't matter where you go within a business, because stuff changes in business all the time. Stuff changes in marketplaces, in the economy all the time. Just look at the last couple of months. But your true north, your purpose, your idea, what you're for, shouldn't change it. And a good story guides you along that way. It's like a sense check that you're heading in the right direction. The length and the paragraphs and the bits in between that story, you know, the words that make it up may change. It might get longer and shorter, but the direction it's going, the big idea it's telling, the purpose it's narrating, should never change. And that's all from me, folks. I'm happy to take questions or recap anything. What I'm going to do is try and exit my screen. Steve, where are we?
Okay.
There we go.
That was awesome, Tim. Yeah, that was really, really good. I mean, I've heard a lot of people explain stories, and I like the way that you put that into a great structure, which is awesome. And we have got a couple of questions in, which is brilliant. So people start being interactive. And I would normally respond to you all, but now I'm facilitating and responding. And I don't know, I'm now doing this. Okay. But I'm going to start off with a question from Hannah. And Hannah has said, What is more important? How comfortable you are telling a story in a form or format, sorry, or the format that the audience wants it. Has that made sense?
Yes, yeah. So a question of which is more important, form or format, I think. But yeah, I understand that question. So there isn't a simple answer. As the storyteller, right, it's your job to, in theory, deliver the big idea that this story carries, right? So I would always start with not forcing yourself to deliver in a format you don't like doing, because a story is an emotive piece of paper and people can read into what's not comfortable. I think audiences, especially online, right, we're in a lucky space and a lucky time that it's super easy to take a webinar like this that's being recorded onto a video and then transcribe it into a blog format and snip it up for social media and do a live version as well. So it's easy to take the story and put it in a format that your audience wants. So I would focus initially on telling the story, telling a good story that your audience cares about, because you can make it into a format. A format is a secondary thing, but you do, like any good storyteller, you do need to understand your audience, right? It is for people. So hopefully that helps, but I would get comfortable with telling your own story and then work on the rest.
Okay, nice. Now, before I ask you the next question, because I think that is a great answer, because I think you get some people out there who tell such an amazing story and you're completely engaged for that whole time, and then you walk away and you go, I'm not really sure what I've listened to, but I thought it was brilliant, and you can't really take it back. But so I totally get that. So Vicky has asked, do you have any tips to make that story more visual?
Again, I think we're in an amazing world where tech allows us to do anything of that. There's a great kind of story format called Picture, which is basically telling a story over photos. I think there's a lot of people, including myself, that are visual learners, and aspire to visual. So even having graphics behind you that support it, do you know what I mean, rather than reams of text, is super important. And there's formats now that are amazing, like live video and stories, right? The live streaming stuff, even if it's a bit raw, right, is a great visual storytelling sort of thing. But you can take the transcription of a story, the verbs of a story, and give it, you know, there's quite cheap ways of making it an animated storyboard video as well, which is another visual thing. But there's so many answers to this, Vicky. I will tell you what one final twist on that story. So I mentioned Nancy Duarte in there somewhere about the shape of a story, and I didn't go into super detail because it's a rabbit hole on its own about story formats and stuff. But the shape of a story is very much like a castle's ramparts. If you imagine a castle, drawing a castle as a kid, it's a bit like that. It goes from where you are now to where you could be, from where you are now to where you could be. And it's that annotation, that energy, but we're here now, but look what could happen. And we're here now, look what could happen, right? And you're painting that picture, which is an emotive way. People get the visualization in your head. Do you know what I mean? It becomes not just a monotone delivery of a financial statement at one level. It's important to emphasize the points, putting color and visual and depth into each point that you want to make along the way. I hope that helps. I might have waffled a bit there, Vicky, sorry.
No, I know, I definitely get it. I mean, I've noticed significant changes in events and how people deliver those, but people are delivering stories live, but then are adding a pre-recorded element that's been really done amazing with graphics and music, and even to the point where we're now having musical interludes, where people are going, hey, actually, my buddy owns a band, and here he is, and then they do something, and it's just sometimes just great to break things up. But again, it's all about keeping it relevant to get your message out there.
This is
We have a question from Dave, and this one is straight to the business, straight to the business end. Stories
cool.
sound like a nice thing to do, but are they commercial?
Yeah, that's a question I get quite a lot, obviously, because there's always in the workshops I deliver normally, there's always kind of a financial guy or a commercial sales director in there that, you know, story is lovely, but they're not seeing the bottom line of it. But there's a great project that's happened called you can look it up on the internet actually, called the Significant Objects Project, right? And it was done by a researcher, I believe, from one of the big American universities. I want to say Stanford, but I might be wrong. But what he did, he thought, I want to prove the commercial value of story, right? So he went on eBay and he bought 200 items for $1, right? So you can imagine the quality of these items. I think one was like a weird unicorn horse head rubber thing. And there was some odd items, maybe half a vase, a little plastic soldier, stuff like that, right? Rubbish, like $1's worth of items, or a quid's worth of items. Right? He bought 200 of these things, and they all arrived. And he asked a bunch of authors and storytellers and filmmakers and marketers and presenters and stuff like that to, if they would participate in the study and write a story about a random item he's going to send them. Right? And he got all these people to do this thing, and there was one story per item, and they listed them back on eBay with the same title, right? With the same title, the same description, but only addition was this story attached to why this item was important. And he sold the $200 worth of items for over $8,000 just by adding a story, right? And that's a proven research case study of the only thing they've changed is telling the story, because creativity, story, depth, and purpose adds value to any product and service. You can sell products and services transactionally, right? You become a utility. You know, I don't need to know the story of the bread and milk I buy in my supermarket. I don't need to know a story. I just want it. I want to get out. I want it for a reasonable price. But when I'm buying a car or something, a motive or a big purchase, something that matters, not a utility, not a transactional thing, that's where story comes into play. So it makes products, services more valuable by attaching that creativity in that story.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And a prime example of this would be charities. You know, if you charities, they've proven how a good story works, because, you know, if you were just told, hey, listen, can you donate some money, please, because there's not enough water in this village in Africa, you would probably go, wow, I'm a little less reluctant to do that. But if you were then shown an image of a young child with no shoes on, walking miles and miles to have to carry water back with a bucket, and this is his day every single day, you go, oh, wow, that's, you know, I'm going to donate, just get this guy some shoes. You know, it's all of a sudden you put emotion in there, you've told a story, you are much more likely to do that. So that's why you never just get told about a charity problem, you get shown it.
This is it as well. And there's a bunch of stuff out there. Again, it's a tangent you can look into yourself, but about purpose-driven brands from normal brands, because purpose-driven brands are, you know, they're the cool thing to be a purpose-driven brand. People are trying to attach purposes that aren't particularly purposey. They've just tried to stick them on. But there's been a load of studies on McKinsey and HBR as resources I would look at, but of the economic impact and the growth of a purpose-driven brand, because a brand should really, a good brand nowadays should really give somebody something to buy into, not to just buy from, if you know what I mean. And the thing to buy into is emotive again. It's story based, it's narrative. They want to be part of that thing. They want to be part of it. They belong to it, right?
Yeah, no, I get it. The belonging is huge. Again, it's we're talking about stories drawing people together, you know, that connection. We got a question from Stephen, just in case he gets offended. If you are someone that uses body language as an engagement tool, how would you visually change that, or would you attempt to continue doing the same?
That's a good question. I mean, again, you can do use video a lot to compel the body language story, right? There's a great Do lecture. There's a series of events called Do lectures, and there's a guy on it called Steve Edge. So if you look for Steve Edge in Do lecture, right, it's the epitome of using his body to tell a story. It could look to many that he's all over the place, like all over the stage on the video and on the presentation and flitting about, but he brings every point and every move to a point of the story, which is really good. And I think, you know, you've still got to deliver. I said right in the beginning, you've got to superpower the humanity, right? And narrative gives you the vehicle to do that. You've got to make sure the connection and the motive and the energy comes across. I think the energy comes across with movement. I'm very gestury, as you can probably tell. But I think don't curtail your body language, Stephen. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would use it. It comes across even if it's not the right format, but video storytelling is probably the great way to do it. Even if you have to do a presentation, there's a great tool called Soapbox, which does a video at the side and your presentation next to you, so you can see you delivering the presentation, which is really cool.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. I might check that out. But you know, you've got to play to your strengths. So, Stephen, if one of your strengths is your body language, then do everything you can to keep that going. John Maffioli, who hosts the Hub CP events, we recently did an event where he was sat down, and we're never doing that again. He's all over the shop, but when he's up, he's animated, he's doing his thing, which is fantastic. And also, didn't we see an event recently where we had a really good artist? I don't want to embarrass. Is it Vicky? She drew her slides and was bringing them out and showing how she draw, because that's her thing.
Yeah, it was Carla on the Creative Mornings.
That's it. So Carla, she didn't want to do slides. This is what she does. This was her thing. So she spoke through her story, pre-drawn slides and added, and it was a great visual thing to do. So yeah, always try and keep it visual wherever you can. I think we might have one more. Here we go. So do we think that more stories will stay virtual after COVID-19? So this is quite relevant. This is from Hannah.
I think definitely. I think the world of events, like conferences and seminars, I think will be in this format for a bit. I think maybe there's been trends that you know, stuff like pitches. If you got to go and pitch a thing, is pretty effective if you record the pitch and then have a conversation about it and then split up that story that you're telling into little bits. For example, there's using the 3 pillars that we discussed earlier, right? So the conversational bit, you'll have a conversation with the person you're going to pitch to make sure what you're going to pitch is aligned. So you tell them what you're going to pitch, and then you put together a video and the deck for a pitch, and you tell them what you told them you're going to tell them. Right, bear with it. There's a lot of this. And then afterwards, you follow up, right? And you tell them what you've just told them, right? It's a really traditional, it's really, really good story format, right? You tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them the thing, and then you tell them what you've just told them to recap. I use that today, that you'll probably notice in a minute that I've done that, right? I started off by telling you what I'm going to tell you, then I told you it, and then I recapped and told you the stuff I just told you. because it helps retain the information. It's really good in pictures, but I think that sort of stuff is really effective online, and it doesn't need to be done in person. It's an easy transition. And event, like I said in the talk, me and Steve did a lot of real life events in the past, in the recent past. And a lot of really good conferences now are splitting story up into virtual. So they're doing a Facebook Live launch, right, for a thing like today, which is a webinar or a video launch, and a thing about the webinar where they deliver the content. And then there's a follow-up conversational event, like a panel or a Q&A with the person who delivered the thing. So you're not sitting there for 4 hours, but it's the same content delivered in bite-sized bits. And I think that, you know, I've been to some terrible in-person events, and that is a lot more effective, and you don't have to travel. So I think there's definitely more space for virtual storytelling now to replace bad in real life. I don't know what you think, Steve.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're going to. I know from now on, whenever someone asks me to support them in an event, my first question is always, why are we doing this event? To really truly dig into, is it necessary? And often that tells a story. But my second question is always going to be now, should this be digital or should this be physical? And I like that because then I can use the word fidgetal when I do a combination of the two. But more importantly, there's a lot to be said for meeting people and being in an environment where you can share that experience in nurturing the next level of communication, bonding, and business. And then in the virtual world, how great is it that you're going to be able to get to see somebody speak and maybe interact with who's the other side of the world who you would never have normally gone to speak to. The world, it's going to be fantastic. The world has just got smaller.
Yeah, so this is it. There's a couple of really good points there, Steve, that you made. Actually, I wanted to say right at the beginning, but there's a traditional theory in marketing called the hierarchy of communication, right? And it's got a long title because it's academic. And at the top is human to human, face to face contact is at the top, because we like that stuff. We can shake hands, we can hug, we can see facial expressions, you know, all that sort of thing. And then next is video calling, so Skype, Zoom, that sort of thing. And then telephone calling. And then I think now live video has been added, and stories and that sort of social media bit. And then email, then texting. And then it's like a hierarchy of communication. And I don't think online virtual events will replace human to human connection. I think we'll always need that, but what it will do, like any good tech, is augment it. It will make the human experiences more valuable because we've probably a bit of a warmer relationship, right? There's a connection already there. If I've come on 3 or 4 Zoom calls with you, Steve, and never met you in real life, I feel like I've known you. In fact, I do know you. I don't think there's any definition. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I think the hybrid is where the thing is. It'll be interesting for what online content conferences and exhibitions do around the real life event, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. I look forward to it. It's going to be great. Now, we've got to wrap up. This is fantastic. I mean, I could ask you more questions and just keep going on and on because I'm chatty, right? I don't want to get too used to being this end of the camera. But thank you so much, Tim. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
You send all that stuff over to me. I think I know I've got most of it, and I will make sure it gets out to everybody who attended. I'll get it all out to them tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I've really loved this. But before I wrap up, I've got 2 favors to ask. One is, please attend my webinars coming to the next one. Don't want to seem like a beggar, but we have another webinar this month, which is going to be with Matt Davies and Annalise James. Annalise is a personal brand expert, and Matt is he'd hate me for saying this, but kind of a corporate brand expert. And you are your brand. So whether you're the CEO, you're the brand of your company, or whether it's your personal brand because you do something individually, you are your brand. And then these guys are going to give you all of the insights on how to make sure that not only are you your brand, but also you're guaranteeing that people who know your brand are telling other people what your brand is. You know, that's the secret. And I kind of stole that line from Victoria Taylor, who's on here too. So you'll recognize that. That's one of the most impactful things I've heard about branding. So that's our next one. And then next month, we've got some amazing people. We've got, in fact, she's on here now, Suzanne Suthers, who is an expert in how you're perceived by what you wear and what you look like. And that is so important right now because we are all going online. We are putting ourselves out to the world. And she's going to be doing a great talk on how important is it what we wear now. Now we are doing more virtual events. And actually, it's really important. And I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. And keep your head on a swivel for more stuff coming out, because there's actually another 2 after that I'm about to announce as well, so that's great. The next favor I have is when this closes down, you'll be asked to answer a few questions just to let me know how we did today and how we can improve this for you all. And we've got some feedback coming in, I know already, and I'm really happy with the way Tim delivered his message and the way that you all stayed attentive for so long as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and I look forward to hearing from you all, and I will see you on the 27th of May for the next one. Thanks a lot, guys. Chat to you soon. Bye-bye, Tim.